Shalom, shalom. I want to give honor and glory to Yahweh Shem Yahshua. And, today's lesson is going to be about adultery. There's a lot that goes into that. There's a reason why precepts get into it deeply, because it's something that, our nation deals with heavily, and you can't. It's a sin unto death above all things. So, it's a very grave sin, to say the least. Nevertheless, start with the basic. Let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 14. It says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." So, in all these 10 commandments, there's it's a summary of the whole law. I wish I remember that precept. Nevertheless, this whole thing is what? It's a summary of the whole thing. I think it's in Romans chapter 13, verse 8. Let's see. I hope so. Hope I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. Perfect. It says, "Owe no man anything, but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." Because what? When you do the law, that is how you love. For this thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, so any of the other commandments, it is briefly comprehended in this saying. So it's summarized in this saying. Namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Because what? When you love your neighbor as yourself, you do many things through that. You don't commit adultery. You're not going to feed the other person pork, because you wouldn't do that to yourself. You're not going to give them weed, say, let's smoke one. You're not going to buy a bottle and say, let's make something happen today. No. This is how you show love one to another. Just for edification's sake, let's go to the book of 3 John chapter verse 6. Or maybe, this is what happens when you're not in here too long. Or maybe it's 2 John. Yeah, it's 2 John, verse 6. Yep. "And this is love, that we walk after his commandments. This is the commandment, that as ye had heard from the beginning, ye should walk in it." So, love is keeping in his commandments. So it's plain and simple. Continuing on, let's go to the book of Proverbs, chapter 6 and verse 32. It says, "But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding." Because, it's like 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 22. It says what? "But it is happened unto them according to the true proverb, the dog is turned to his own vomit again, and the soul that was washed to her wallowing in the mire." So, when you come into this truth, and you actually do what you need to do, you take root and you go back to the world, it's like a dog that turned to his own vomit. And it's like the pig that was washed, but now is, basically rolling around in her own dung. So it's the same thing with a brother or a sister that commits adultery. They lack understanding. They really don't know what's going on. It's like watching a kid, you tell them no, don't do this, and then watching them do it again. When you know now for certain that they can't act oblivious. They know they did wrong. It's like having a good kid with a good report, and next thing you know, he did something crazy. It's just like, well, it's just a lack of understanding. They don't understand the gravity of their actions, So it's the same thing with us who commit adultery. We lack understanding. We really don't know what's going on. We're just playing with the Lord. Continuing on, it says, he that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound in dishonor shall he get. Because what? Next thing you know, he gonna get hurt. By Jake, God forbid. Continuing on, in dishonor. So, not only that, you're gonna get a bad report. That's why it says what? Like, a good name is valuable over all rubies. And it's for a good reason. Because it's hard to attain in the first place, and let alone maintain. You could lose that all in one action, such as adultery. Continuing on, it says, and his reproach shall not be wiped away, because the sin is not going to be wiped away. He's going to be known by it, or he's going to at least be remarked by it. He cheated on old girl. Yeah, she cheated on her husband. It's not going to be wiped away. It's going to be permanently. For jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore, he will not spare in the day of vengeance. And like I was saying, he won't get caught, Next thing you know, sisters is going in a brawl session over one man who committed adultery. So, nothing, that jealousy, that anger is going to get you caught up. And you started it. You sparked that fire, Like it says, he will not spare in the day of vengeance. If a brother doesn't express any sort of outward anger, and he just comes to you, saying, I forgive you, I'll pray for you, I'll fast for you, that you get out of that spirit. Now, I don't know, man, that angels are working with him, to say the least. Continuing on, though, it says, he will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content. So, whatever you want to say, oh, my bad, here's all this money or whatever, he's not going to regard it. He's not going to sleep peacefully, continuing on in his life, her life, knowing that she or he got done dirty. Though thou givest many gifts. So you can do whatever you want to do, but that's nothing compared to what you did. That's unforgivable. So it's plain and simple. Anyone who does this, who are really rooted in this truth, understand the gravity of adultery. And he who still does it, they lack understanding. They really don't. They don't have a strong root in this to understand the gravity of what they're doing. Continuing on, let's go to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 3, and verse 8. It says, and I saw, for when all the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away, and had given her a bill of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah feared not, but went and played the harlot also. And it came to pass through the lightness of her whoredom that she defiled the land, and committed adultery with stones and with stocks. So, spiritually, we all are adulterers, and we got to understand that. Back then, Israel got a bill of divorce, and he's still with Judah, the kingdom of Judah. And nevertheless, they switched up too, So, we're all in this together, say at least. We all are indebted to the law. All praise to Yahweh Shem Yahshua. Through grace, through his sacrifice, we are one again, and we got to get right with the Lord. We got to understand it. So continuing on, in Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 7, it says what? How shall I pardon thee for this? Thy children have forsaken me, and sworn by them that there are no gods, when I had fed them to the full. And they then commit adultery, and assemble themselves by troops in the harlot's houses. So, you got to understand how heavy this adultery spirit is with us. It ain't just now, while yes, we live in a very promiscuous society, you know, it ain't nothing new under the sun, you know. Like it says we're gathering by the troops. How. Let's search that up. It says. I mean, it was. Oh, never mind. I guess so. It's just the one. AI is saying that, but I guess. Point still stands though. It says by the troops, so he's referring to a lot. So God forbid he's talking about 16 to 102, but we was by the hordes in harlot houses. We just wilding out. Working with the Lord. But you do got to remember, there was groves in every corner of Jerusalem. We're just freaking off. So, you got to understand how heavy of the spirit this is. How, while yes, it's very serious, it is unfortunately common in our nation. Nevertheless, jumping out to Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 14, it says what? It says, I have seen also in the prophets of Jerusalem an horrible thing. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen also the hands of evildoers, that none doth return from his wickedness. They are all of them unto me as Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. So, hey man, that's a sad report to have, like I was saying. It's a very sad report to have. Imagine the Lord looking at you as Sodom, and as Jerusalem as Sodom, and the inhabitants, us, as Gomorrah. He's basically saying that we're just worthy to be destroyed, off the face of the earth, just like Sodom and Gomorrah was. So, understand how serious this is and how heavy the Lord has a disdain for it. This is this is how he's gonna operate. He's gonna look at you like that, because it isn't just one sin, it's a bunch of others. You read that and let me see. I know it's in Matthew. Let me see. Yeah, it's the book of Matthew, chapter 12, verse 35. It says, Then goeth he, and taketh with himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. And his soul shall be unto this wicked generation. So, that's plain. Hear me? You gotta understand, it's a, one demon, you might, you might just banish it from you, but it's gonna come back with 7 other spirits. It's not gonna just be him. So, the same thing with that adultery, man. It's not gonna just be adultery. It's gonna be other things. Just like you read in Jeremiah 23 and 14. You're gonna walk in lies, God forbid. But, it's going to make you a very unclean man, to say the least. So, continuing on, let's go to the book of Ezekiel. Chapter 16, verse 32. It says, But as a wife that committeth adultery, which taketh strangers instead of her husband. It's like, let's start at verse 31. In that thou buildest thine eminent place in the head of every way, and makest thine high place in every street, and hast not been as an harlot, in that thou scornest hire, but as a wife that committeth adultery, which taketh strangers instead of her husband. So, once again, this is just another precept that, you know, when you act out, you're gonna, or I guess what I'm trying to say, Slacky, I'm trying to just word this, is that, like, you gotta, like, remember this is us. So, don't forget that. Yes, this is spiritual, not really physical, or pertaining unto us individuals, but as a nation, understand that's how that's our relationship with the Lord. We're in the midst of building that relationship back up. So, Ezekiel chapter 23 verse 37 says, or I'll start at verse 36, says, the Lord said moreover unto me, Son of man, wilt thou judge Aholah and Aholabah? Yea, declare unto them their abominations, that they have committed adultery, and blood is in their hands, and with their idols have they committed adultery, and have also caused their sons, whom they bear unto me, to pass for them through the fire to devour them. So, this is just a precept to show you that what? When you praise idols, you also commit adultery with the Lord of all people, with wisdom. So, and that's what I was saying. Like, when you do these things, it shows that you lack understanding. So when you cheat on wisdom, that shows you what? You don't really have wisdom. She didn't give you enough to have you understand what's going on. So, these are our forefathers, These are the abominations that we did. And so understand that adultery is what? An abomination as well. Go to the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 27. It says, Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So you can't be peeping Tom out here. You can't just look every way and just lust after every woman. Understand that, have some shame that some women might be taken, especially, God forbid, Jake out here will look at a woman, regardless if she's with her man. They could be hand in hand. He don't care. He gonna look. He gonna look at, her body, say the least. I'm not gonna get detailed now, but he gonna freak off. That's why in Iraq, I think it's 9. Let's see. Yeah. Oh. Well, yeah, I guess I read that. 9 and 8 says what? Turn away thine eye from a beautiful woman, and look not upon another's beauty. So, it says that for a reason. Look not upon another's beauty. Because what? You could look on another man's wife. That's his beauty. It's not yours. So you got to turn away your eye from that. Let alone from any beautiful woman, but chiefly, a woman that's already taken, that that has a head. For many have been deceived by the beauty of a woman, for herewith love is kindled as a fire. And so,
They don't say, here in the world, they'll say, oh, that, you know, love is like a fire, They'll think it's sweet. But here in the precept, it shows you what? It's telling you that in a negative manner, because fire is something you can't control, if it wows out. That's why we have wildfires, because what? Fire is something you can't control. It'll spread, it'll burn, you to dust and ashes. So, you got to be aware of that. It was 31, Salakia. The book of Sirach, chapter 31, verse 13, it says what? Remember that a wicked eye is an evil thing, and what is created more wicked than an eye? Therewith it weepeth upon every occasion. So, an eye is a very wicked, that's the most wicked body part. So you got to understand that, when Yahushua is speaking about this, hey man, take it seriously. Take it seriously, man. This is a very grave sin. This ain't nothing light. And that our eyes, they want to be wicked. So, you got to have some discipline in yourself. Continuing on, though, it says what? And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. So now is he talking about, physically to just like jam yourself up like that? No. I mean, he's speaking spiritually. It says whatever demon you got, you got to lock in and just drop it, because it's profitable for you to, deal with whatever feelings you're going to get from, cutting yourself off, than to not get the kingdom of heaven. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. It could be your right man, your right hand man, That could be your homegirl. That could be, even, it could be anybody really, It could be a therapist, a counselor, whoever, They could, I forget what's the word. They could enable you to do, bad things. When you turn with wrong counsel, hey man, you gonna do wrong things with that counsel. So, that right hand could be anything. Just like that right eye could be anything. You got to cut it off, though, and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. It has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whoso shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery. So, that's why we lack understanding when we do it, because we cause the nation to fall into adultery as well. Not only are you cheating with another person's partner, but whoever that partner stays with next, if it's not you, because, what more is going to happen? If she's committing adultery with you, what makes you think she's going to stay with you? If he's committing adultery with you, what makes you think he's going to stay with you? So, when he moves on, when she moves on, what? That other person that she lays up with, now she or he has them committing adultery as well. And the chain goes on. The chain goes on. Because, hey man, it's a very wicked thing. It's a very unclean spirit. And you're touching each other, and that spirit is going to hop on, So that's how a nation could easily fall. And that's why it's a very grave sin. Could just hop on to one to another, and judgment be casted onto you. You don't know what's going on. So, it's a very dangerous thing, to have that going on. Continuing on, let's go to the book of Galatians, chapter 5, verse 19. It says, "Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like." All of these are what? These aren't just random things that, are evil, because there's a lot of things that are evil, but, Paul spoke of these things for a specific reason, because they're all kin to each other. Adultery, fornication, they're kin to each other. Uncleanness, like I was saying, these are unclean spirits. These are unclean acts. Lasciviousness, that's how you get there, Idolatry, that's one way how to commit adultery with the Lord. Witchcraft, same way. It's rebellion, Hatred. You could form hate for your brother, for your sister, whoever committed adultery. Variance. Now you're creating variances with, your partners. It says emulations, which is what? Just more anger. It says wrath. Like we're reading in Proverbs chapter 6. That's going to form wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, because these are wicked things. Envyings, God forbid, murders come into play, but hey man, that happens. We see it in the world. Old girl gets caught, cheating. Next thing you know, dude is, shot 7 times. Drunkenness. Maybe that's how you got there, Drunkenness, you're not having the best judgment. Next thing you know, you're committing adultery. You're just sitting there in the hotel room. She's married. You're trying to think of the precepts, but you're too drunk. You're just sitting there saying, you're like, this is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, and verse 68. Says what? And then, it's just saying, and the Lord shall bring you into Egypt again with ships. And then, you're just thinking about camp. You're just saying, says what? With ships. What did the Lord say? With ships. You're not thinking about the right precepts. You're not thinking about precepts like this because you're just too drunk. So, these are all familiar spirits to each other, revelings and such like, because it goes on. Like I said, there's many evil words, these are there's many works of the flesh, but he brought these all out for a reason, because they're alike each other. They go hand in hand, of the which I tell you before, as I have told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Continuing on. It's continuing on. Go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verse 18. It says, once again, neither shalt thou commit adultery. It's a plain commandment. A wise man will speak in a small amount of words. He's not going to be mouthy with his words. And the same thing goes for this. A lot goes into that, just as we've been going into this whole time. This book of Matthew, chapter 19 and verse 9. It says, and I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except to be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery, and so marrieth